Hi guys, I'm Liz. I'm the Director of Analytics at Headset. I have with me Manny. He's our Director of Marketing. He's our VP of Marketing. He executes like a director, strategies like a VP. Best one. Sorry, Manny. Okay, Manny's here too. We are a cannabis data intelligence company. So, a lot of words. What that really means is, though, we help producers, manufacturers, retailers understand both their data and the data in the world around them so that they can make real-time business decisions on data that's coming in within the hour, right? So we're trying to help people understand both their own data and data from the marketplace. To do that, we have 3 products. So our first one is called Retailer. Y'all will never guess this, but it's meant for retailers. It took us a long time to name that. It's meant for retailers, and what it does, if you're a retailer, it takes your point of sale data and it puts it in a system so that you have executive dashboards, you have summaries, you get emails, you get KPIs. We define all of that for you, so as a small business owner, it's a little tough to know what to look at when. So we have a group of a whole bunch of people who do the math and charts for you so that you can just quickly look at the numbers and figure out what's going on. The second product is called Bridge. Again, y'all are never going to guess this, but what it does is it bridges the connection between the producers and the retailers. So it can be difficult to manage your relationship with between the retailers and the producers, understanding, what should be purchased, what products are doing well, and this is software to help you do that. Again, you get dashboards, you get KPIs, all of that's already decided and put together. You just have to plug it in. So there's not all this fussing around trying to decide how to look at things. And then our final product, the really big flagship product, is called Insights. What it does is it takes the data from our participating retailers. It uses a bunch of robots to aggregate, anonymize, run some statistical algorithms on it, and it provides insights into the entire market. So you can kind of compare that to the insights that people like IRI and AC Nielsen provide to CPGs. So it helps you understand, is flour growing? If it is growing, why? And who is it growing with? Which consumer groups? How is it priced? Those sorts of things. So what I'm going to do today is take our insights data and I'm going to tell you a story with it. So I don't just want to show you a bunch of graphs and charts. I want to tell you a story. It's kind of getting to be dark. Maybe it's a bedtime story. So to follow through this whole thing, what I would encourage you to do as I tell you these 2 stories is to think like a child as we go through this. So when you're trying to bring more data into your life, there are a whole lot of things that you need to start thinking about, and one of the biggest things that you should always be doing is looking at your top line metrics and asking yourself why. So I read a statistic a while ago that curious kids ask 73 questions a day. A lot of questions. They don't do it to be annoying, at least I don't think most of the time. They do it because they don't understand the world and how it works. They don't understand their place in it, and they don't understand how to predict things that are happening around them because they don't have enough information yet. Cannabis is still a really young industry. We're almost the age of a child, so we should be constantly asking ourselves these questions. So that's kind of how this will go. I'll start a story, and we'll just kind of keep asking questions until we get to an ending. The endings here are all good. Sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're scary, but the ones I've chosen today are good. So with that, before I tell you our stories, I want to tell you where our data comes from and why you should trust it. There's a whole lot of people that have data, and it's really difficult to know where data comes from and if you should trust it. Most data is data that is forecasted, right? Almost everything you deal with in the day is a forecast, it's based on assumptions. So understanding those assumptions gives you a good baseline to understand your story. So for our data, like I said, we collect data from our participating retailers' point of sales. We take that data and we anonymize it, we aggregate it, we normalize it, bring it into databases. Yeah, totally.
What percentage of the market do you guys work with as far as collecting the POS data?
Yeah. So for the Insights product, that's available in California, Washington, Colorado, Nevada right now. Hopefully it'll be Oregon soon. In order to do all of this, what we have to have is a kind of a good sample of data. If you don't have a good sample, what ends up happening is you produce weird statistics. So if we think about the presentation you just saw, if they asked what % of people use cannabis to just this room, and then they said that was how the whole US was, that wouldn't be a very good sample. We're not the average person in here, right? And so right now what I don't have is a good enough sample in Oregon to release our insights. I'm hoping to have it soon. I just need more retailers to be on board. Cool.
But our two products, Bridge and Retailer, are available across the United States, everywhere. Our Insights products need certain critical mass in order for us to responsibly provide data that is sound. So we wait for that critical mass to be there in order to release it.
What critical mass are you looking for?
Usually it's between 15 and 20% of transaction volume. The thing is, a representative small sample is much better than a big biased sample. And so there are some markets where you can have 30%, but it's so biased that it really can't tell you anything about the 70% you're missing. And there's other places, when I was researching for my PhD, where we would take a group of 300 people, run an experiment on them, and say that applies to all 6 billion in the world. So it really just depends how stratified your sample is across what you think is true, and then your assumptions on what you think is true, which is just like holding the combo. Cool. All right. So then the first robot comes in, and it works with people. So what we do is each store has different products. They name them different. But what we do is we link those products across stores so that you can get insights, right? So that we know that product A at store 1 is the same as product B at store 2, and we can get brand level insights, product level insights, package size level insights. Finally, we run it through the statistical algorithms. I've been told I say statistical words too much, and that was by a class I was teaching statistics to, so I'm not going to say them. I'm not going to bore you all to death with them, but we correct for things like sampling bias, like was just brought up, and measurement error as best we can. And then once we know all that's done, we have our insight problem. So,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
What point of sale systems do you work with?
Oh my gosh, we work with quite a few.
We currently have more than 17 we work with. So basically we cover everything. So we have connections with all of them.
And is it integrated into the system automatically, or do people have to opt in and purchase this separately?
Yeah, basically you need to opt in, but it's very simple. You don't need to be a techie for it. It's just a phone call, an email, and we just automatically, through API connections, we connect to the POS, and there you go. Like, you're good to go.
And the retailer product doesn't cost anything. You can just call it and get connected.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna tell you two stories. One is about pricing trends, and the other one's about purchasing trends. As we're following this whole tell stories, ask why, you all seem like you love questions, but be sure to ask me why as we go through. Leave no question unanswered. So if you see something you want me to go deeper into it, I probably don't have the data. I could make it up pretty well usually. No, I'm kidding. I would never make up data. Y'all didn't even laugh. Y'all didn't even hear. Yeah, I got one person in the front row, you guys. All right, so if you do have questions, I can always look into it later. And there are a whole lot of pieces in here of reports that I haven't put up. So one of the other things we do in addition to our products is we publish reports or stories with their data at least every month. So they're 10 or 15 page reports that give you a deep dive into things that we think are important in the industry. And our first one, the one that we did in March was about pricing trends. And I'm going to go through that real quick. So we're going to get to the bottom of the pricing trends. You're welcome to take pictures of all the slides. If you want, my email is liz@headset.io. If you just shoot me an email, I will send you the slides so you can save your phone memory for pictures of your dinner and selfies with your dog and all the important things in life. Yeah, totally. All right, so we're going to look at pricing trends. So what we saw at the top level when we looked at the 4 states we have data for is that California has the most expensive prices. So we're just looking at average item price here, the average price of an item that's sold. We're looking at recreational cannabis sales. So they come from retailers. It's only the cannabis sales, things like t-shirts and bongs, not included.
When you break down cannabis sales, that means topicals, edibles, and everything, or is it flower?
It means everything, yeah. So at Headset, we categorize things into 9 categories.
Okay.
We'll see them at some point, but flower, pre-roll, concentrates, vapor pens is beverages, right? Edibles, beverages, topicals, tinctures. Probably one I missed there, capsules. Okay, so we see California has really high prices, but why is that true? Is it because Californians are just rich and they pay a lot of money? Is it because they buy really expensive things? Is the same vapor pen different prices across states? So when we look a little closer, it is all pre-tax data, but that's a really good question. Yeah, and you should always ask, our top line numbers are all reported before excise and sales tax. Yeah. So when we look at the trend, what we see is that in California, 30% of sales volume is to vapor pens. Vapor pens are one of the more expensive items out there. So because Californians really like vapor pens, it skews their average item price up. So that gives us a little more information about why prices are high in California. But, everybody has vapor pens. So now what we wonder, as we're asking why, is are vapor pens more expensive in California, or do people just buy more of them? So if we dig a little deeper, what we find is the average item price in California for a vapor pen is in the $40 range, versus in Washington where it's $25. So now we see the vapor pen cartridges are nearly twice the price in California. We can also see the unit share there. So we knew that vapor pens were 30% of the market in California for sales, and they're 21% of the units. It's because they're a higher than average price, so their unit share is a little bit smaller. But now, even though we know this, and I'm sure everybody in this room kind of knows, package sizes can be really different. Y'all have a very different package size requirement for edibles here, for instance, with the 50 milligrams. In Washington, we can have them be 100, and actually in all these markets, they can be 100. So package sizes can really change the price of an item. So if we dig a little deeper into this average item price, what we find is that in California and Washington, there are a whole lot of 1 gram cartridges. They make up almost 30–40% of the market. You would expect a 1 gram cartridge to cost more than a ½ gram cartridge, unless you're absolutely crazy. So what we now need to think about as we're trying to decide why our price is higher in California is these package sizes. So finally, what we can get to, and the whole reason we wrote this report, is one of the good ways to think about pricing. Rather than thinking about it as the average item price, we can think about it as the price per equivalized volume, or the price per gram, in vapor pens, for instance. So here, what we find, comparing the average item price to the price per gram, is that the most expensive place to buy vapor pens is Nevada. It wasn't California. Oh my gosh, I'm surprised. Not so. So in Nevada, the average gram cartridge for a vapor pen is $96. That's almost 3 times Washington. So this is one of the reasons that we like to keep digging through the data. When you see a top line trend, you should always be asking yourself questions. Why is this true? What does it mean? What is the top line number hiding that I didn't see until I dug down? So now to continue our child analogy, we learned a new thing. Let's try it somewhere else.
I have a question.
Yeah, totally.
So, do you look at these in side by side with like cost of, not cost of living, but like cost of to do business, rent prices, etc., for building space and commercial?
Yeah, no, you know what? I didn't. And I think that's a good point. You probably could, absolutely. It's just another way to like keep drilling down and see like that would be what are the contributors to price being higher. So we know the price per gram is higher, but maybe in California, I don't know,
They're astronomical.
the actual cartridges cost more because glass is expensive. There can be all sorts of things. And that's a great example of why you should just keep digging down into your data. If I dug the whole way down, y'all, we would be here until like next week. It would not be good. So
for like Nevada, did you look at tourist information versus
totally, yeah, that's actually really interesting. So we do see a little bit of that. There is a fair amount of pot tourism in Nevada, especially actually in vapor pens. Those ½ gram cartridges are really common there. I don't think a lot of people go on vacation for 4 days and buy a gram just for their weekend. Maybe, it's a hell of a weekend. But we do definitely see, especially when you look at retailers that are near the strip, versus near the strip in Las Vegas, versus like way out in the middle of nowhere, you do see really different trends. Another place where you see interesting trends, it's not actually tourism, is border stores. So stores right on the border of Iowa, man, their per capita sales are high, and it's because Iowa's high. So they can't buy it in their own state. So yeah, it's just another way to kind of think about those things. Cool, yeah. So we're going to move on. We learned this new thing. We learned this price per equivalized volume rather than average item price. Now we're going to apply it to flower prices in California. Because I had this crazy thing that went on at the end of last year. I was reporting data that people were saying was wrong, and I knew I was right in my heart, but I just couldn't prove it. And this price per equivalized volume helped to show that what we were saying was true and what the other person was saying was true. So what I was saying was true is the average item price for loose flower, leaf flower in California was going up since legalization. This is 2018. But the news said price in California was going down. Another person who was doing research said price was going down. Well, how in the world can those two things be true at the same time? So I looked at price per gram, which was going down. Now how can price per gram go down, but the price at the register goes up? The reason is Californians started stocking up. So what we saw happen was at the start of the market, over 50% of sales were for single grams. So loose flour, they're buying just a gram. 57% of unit sales were a single gram. Versus at the end of the year, it was almost just a third, and 50% of the sales were 2 1/8. So we're looking at 3.5 times the size being sold as the average item. And that's what's driving the price up, is people are just buying more of it at once, while the per gram price is going down. And this is why it's really important to dig into numbers, especially when you see conflicting numbers. Because on their face, you can see a news story that says prices are going up, and a news story that says prices are going down. You read those and you think, well, I can't trust data, I won't use it. Don't do that. Always trust data. You should always be using data to make your decisions. You just need to figure out why those two trends exist to help you understand what's happening. Here it's really important if you're either a retailer or a manufacturer or producer, so that you can know how you should be packaging your flour for people, right? It's important to know if you're someone that's producing a gram here, we might need to think about whether we need to buy some different package sizes, because that's not the most common trend anymore. So that's one story. That's the end of pricing trends. Does anybody have any questions about my pricing trend story? Yeah, totally.
Did you get any average transaction price data?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. We do a lot of that, like average basket size. Yeah, so you were looking at average item price on there, which was in California, for instance, $30. The average basket in California has like 2.2 items in it. So the average basket then is close to $70. But in that report, so that is some data that I just yanked right out of a report I'd already written. If you go to headset.io, you can download it. It's for free. And there's a ton of reports in there that look at basket trends. Yeah?
Did you calculate for tiers, like flour tiers?
I did, yeah. I've got some really cool stuff with tiers. We're going to look at that in the purchasing trends, but with edible. But what we saw in flour tiers is that commodity price flour, especially in ounces, was really starting to grow. So we were looking at unit sales here. So ounces are only 4% of units. But when you think about it, an ounce is priced 20 times as much as a gram. And so that actually takes up a much larger amount of total sales. But we did start to see kind of the end of this report gets into how you're going to price tier. And we are seeing a bit of bifurcation into commodity level pricing and then this premium, like super luxury pricing of like the really good stuff. Yeah, totally.
Is commodity level pricing, you mean like budget pricing? What is commodity level
Yeah,
mean?
I didn't define that, did I? I'm going to be honest, in that report, I kind of shied away from defining it exactly. It is people that price like really cheap. I didn't want to call it cheap shit. Manny, my marketer, said I wasn't allowed to use that as a term. Everybody blamed him. I thought cheap shit was good. But I think we called it value pricing. He had a much more PC, yeah. Now I'm going to have to buy the drinks tonight because I said it. But yeah, that's kind of what I mean. It's just stuff that's priced per gram a lot less than something else.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you have information on Oregon? I noticed that you just watched
I know. Yeah, so I have a little bit of information on Oregon, but I haven't reached that critical mass yet where I can say, yes, I have a representative sample. I'm getting really close. If any of y'all are retailers and want the free retail platform, that gets me even closer. So visit headset.io. I'm not in sales. I'm terrible at it. I'm totally honest. I will pass you off to someone in sales if I can't do that. But I think we're getting close. It would be nice to be able to do that, especially with the pricing trends. I would love to interlay those. Manny and I went to a couple of dispensaries here. Prices are low. We bought
It was
some
awesome.
stuff. Yeah, it was great. Especially compared to Washington.
Oregon releases data by type.
They do, yeah. You can totally get some of the state data, yeah. So the actual form factors, I think they do concentrates, bulk flour, and edible oils. Yeah. Yeah. It's not like quite to the level that some of these are, but it's at least a place to start.
Every month we release a report that shows the first one.
If you email me, I'll send you a link where you can find that data. It's just free data.
Because I just have to go find theirs.
Yeah, totally. All right, so I'm going to start my second story. So another Once Upon a Time here. The next story I'd like like to tell with data is about purchasing trends. We're going to look at edibles. I've had so many requests to like deep dive into edibles this year. It seems like edibles are on everybody's mind. They're getting a lot yummier. A lot more people are trying them, and they have a lot of growth. So what we're going to do here are examine the edibles market. What you're looking at is the aggregated sales data for the 4 markets we're in, which was California, Colorado, Washington, Nevada. And what we see is edibles in January 2019 were about $44 million in sales in those markets. That makes it about a $500 million industry in those 4 states for yearly. Yeah, so probably a little more than a $500 million by the end of the year. So the next thing we think about is we know how big it is, but what does that mean? Is it better than it was before? Where does this fit in the world? That's the whole thing we're trying to do, is figure out where these pieces of data fit in the world and fit in your story. So what we see is edibles grew 55% from January 2018, comparing that sales to January 2019. So 55% is great growth, right? It is, actually, it turns out. So what we see is edibles were kind of right in the medium high-end range of growth of all the categories that we have. So the biggest jumps were in vapor pens. Vapor pens really just kind of, yeah,
I apologize. Is this all encompassing of all states, or?
this is for the 4 states that I did insights in. So
So
California.
average overall growth between the 4 was 65.
Yes, yep, yeah. And one thing it is it's a like state comparison, since California was legal in January of 2018.
Right.
We're kind of comparing apples to apples. When you see growth numbers around, especially for the cannabis industry, be sure to keep in the back of your mind when states legalized, because if you compare 2017 to 2018, at a top line level, even for total US, we didn't have California really being involved. And so a lot of that growth is a new market coming in, and it's not organic growth that will continue for the next couple of years. I mean, the growth trends will still be there, but it's not going to be as explosive as it was if you did 2017 to 2018. So these are like on purpose, so that you can compare like markets. So yeah, we see edibles at 55%, kind of right there in the middle. That sounds great. Why did they grow 55% though? What does that mean? So if you think about the whole market, oh yeah, go ahead.
Is this based on per capita sales or just sales on transactions?
Both. It is the total retail, recreational retail sales volume in those 4 states added up. So it's not really it's not forecasted against per capita. So a lot of the states produce or report their total numbers. We look to those to help us guide what our totals should be, and then we look to our stores and their samples to guide what our projections should be for the category segments, brands, that sort of thing. I will be very frank with all of you. California's data is the murkiest of data, so it's a little difficult. They report quarterly sales tax numbers and excise tax numbers, but they don't make sense, and they often restate them by more than 25%. So it's a murky market to project, but I think we're doing at least a decent job now. So if we look at market share, right, we know that it grew. Since it grew faster than average, what we see is that edibles came up from 11% of the market in 2018 to now today we're looking at 12%. That's up from 8% in 2018. So these are definitely gaining market share from other segments. But again, what does that mean? So if we think about total sales
So in that capacity, you're saying they're taking from other areas. The industry as a total is not growing. You're just getting a bigger piece of the pie.
The industry of the total is growing as well, but so it is growing faster than everybody else is growing. So if we think back to physics, and we know since we're cannabis users, we all did really well in school. If we think back to physics, it is accelerating in growth rather than keeping steady or decelerating. Flower is slightly decelerating in growth, still growing slower than it used to. Yeah.
Did you calculate how many new entries were into that market?
New products. Yeah, that's actually one of the things we do. It's not in this data, but that's one of the big things that is in our data. We report we get real-time data, so we get it in every single day, and we report how many new products are on the market, and we do report what % of sales are to new products. That story I didn't tell here, because that story to me is one of the scary stories. New products, I forget which state it was in, but we're seeing new products sometimes make up 30% of total sales, like products that have been released in the last 90 days. I mean, these products can really hit fast sometimes. It's not in every market, it's not in every segment, but you really see new products hit fast. What is not scary about it though, so what they say about every story is if it's a sad sad ending or a happy ending. It just depends where you stop telling it. Seems scary that they're making up this big amount of sales. Really what's happening is these products coming to the market, they're starting to grow the pie. So if we think about total sales, we know total sales are up for flour, but why are they up? So if you think about total sales, it's only made up of two things. Total sales for a retailer are two things. The number of transactions they have, or the number of baskets, and the average size of that basket. That's mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. That is how we know total sales. Number of baskets and the average size of the basket. Each of these are then broken down into two things. So if we're looking at number of baskets, we get number of baskets by knowing how many shoppers came in and how many times they shopped. So they're really only the two things that make up the number of baskets. When we think about the size of the baskets, again, we have two things. How many items are in that basket and how much does the average item cost? So if we break down total sales growth, it has to be due to one of these four things. There's no other options. It's either due to the fact that we got more shoppers, our shoppers started shopping more often, our shoppers shopped the same amount but they bought more stuff when they came, or our shoppers bought the same amount of stuff but they bought more expensive goods. Those are the only ways that we can do this. So this is where our story turns into choose your own adventure. It's not choose your own adventure, I'll choose the adventure for you. I've already decided it with the slides. Thankfully though, I'm one of those weird completionists, so we're going to do one and go back and start over so we do both because I can't do anything halfway. So first thing that we're going to look at is the size of the baskets. So for a basket that contains an edible, how much sales were to edibles? So edibles baskets contain lots of other things. In fact, edibles is one of the types of products that we see most show up with other baskets. So that's another really interesting analysis we've done. Actually, I think in May, this is going to be a big part of our report that we put out. The report we're putting out in May is looking at how baskets are composed. So not just what product is in the basket, is it my product, but what else are other people buying? So when you bought my pre-roll, what else did you buy? And which products seem to drive baskets? So which products are often on their own, and which products just seem to be tossed in there, right? Like you go in, you're coming in to buy some flour, and you're like, that's a pretty cool looking edible right there. It's a single serve, yeah, I'll have it. So we're kind of trying to break down those trends. Anyway, here what we're looking at is the average edible sales transaction size. Looks kind of flat, maybe up a little. California had some weird stuff go on in June, July, a bunch of package changes that made a whole lot of products back on the shelves unsaleable starting in July, so a lot of clearing things out, a lot of price changes. So that's a weird hop there. Other than that hop and decline because of that, it looks pretty stable. But we just learned we should always ask why and never trust things at the top line. So if we dig a little deeper, we know that the average transaction size is made up of two things: the number of items in the basket and how much those items cost. So, interestingly, the trend is flat because the number of items in the basket are going down while the average price of an item in the basket is going up. So this really helps us understand, even though it seems like everything is going steady, what there is a current underneath what looks like still water. And so people are buying slightly fewer products when they come in, but those products are more expensive.
Can I ask you a question on that last slide?
Yeah.
Is that a mistake where it goes January, February, like January beginning, February 19, March 19? Like,
Yeah, I'm so sorry. No, that's just an absolute typo. I have a t-shirt for you afterwards.
Okay.
My first time doing the presentation. Any other typos, I have a couple of t-shirts. I'm hoping it's less than 4 because I have 4 t-shirts.
It was a joint venture.
Yeah, no. Well, you know what? T-shirts for both. All right, perfect. I was going to give out t-shirts for questions, but then everybody asked questions. I didn't think I'd get a t-shirt guy here festival. All right, so what we know is that top line trend that seems smooth is actually being driven by slightly fewer items in a basket and slightly higher prices when we're purchasing.
So these are all 2018 numbers, just to be clear.
So this stuff at the end, this is not a typo. Those really
Okay.
are 2019.
Okay.
Yeah, I was kind of medium on the typing here, a little better here.
Okay.
Again, same thing here. I copied the axis, so same typo. Don't try to get a t-shirt out of it. That typo has a t-shirt.
No double dip.
Right. So when we think about this average item price, why is that happening? Is it because everything is moving up a little bit, or is it because of the sales mix is changing? And what we found is it turns out the sales mix is changing. At the start of the market in California, there were a whole lot of cheap edibles on the market. They made up a large percent of units. So We see that in January, products that cost less than $15 were a pretty decent chunk. And now, actually, we had these really high-priced products too. But now we're kind of coming into this space where everything's priced right here in the middle, maybe a little bit up here. We've kind of had this convergence away from cheap products and from expensive products. But as you all know, there are a whole lot of kinds of edibles. So what I did is I dug a little deeper. To keep the story shorter, it's just one graph, but what it turned out was doing this in California is gummies. So gummies are a massive portion of the market in California. In total, gummies are like 45% of edible sales in California. Each of these dots is a data point, and together all those data points would equal 100% of edible sales. So what we see is 25% of edible sales are going to gummies that are priced between $15 and $17. What's interesting though is chocolates are the next biggest segment. They're quite large in California, but very few things are priced in that $15 bucket. In chocolates, we see a lot of luxury priced items. We see over 15% of sales coming to these $20, $25 items, right? And so what we have is a slightly different trend. These are the same package sizes. These are, what you're looking at here is 100 milligram packages. So we're getting this kind of difference between gummy pricing and chocolate pricing. So chocolate in California is starting to become more of a luxury item, whereas gummies are kind of moving their way down more to a mid-price item. They're not quite cheaply priced, but they're also, they don't come in these luxury items. So if you're a brand or a producer, these are really good trends to watch because it seems to me that people like expensive edibles, but we just don't have many in the market in gummies. And so is there space for an expensive gummy, for instance? And these are why you should always bring yourself down through the data to really understand what's happening, because underneath, when you find these trends, are where you'll find the opportunities.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Totally, yeah.
When we look at expensive, like, are we comparing the same quantity of those?
We are, yep.
Okay.
Yeah, those were all 100 milligram packs.
Okay.
Yep.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, what I will say is, so I'm not as familiar with the edible packaging here. In California, it can be a 100 milligram pack, but each individual gummy can be more. So there are gummies that are, it's a 100 milligram pack, but each gummy is like 2 milligrams. And there are 100 milligram packs where each gummy is 10 milligrams.
Yeah.
They both add to 100 milligrams. But for some reason, those heavier dose ones, the 10 milligram ones, actually sell for higher prices for a 100 milligram pack than the lower dose ones, which you could just bite it. Yeah, it's an interesting, you could just bite it in half. I want to tell consumers that, but at the same time, manufacturers need to make money, so do what you can. I won't let them know. Our stuff is just B2B. I don't tell consumers any of your secrets. All right, so we're going to go back. I chose your own adventure. Now we're going to go back through the other one. Then I'm totally done. And y'all can go and be done with your night. It hasn't seemed like anybody's fallen asleep yet to the bedtime stories. Maybe this one will do it. What we're going to look at here is number of baskets. This research kind of goes along with the research that we just saw the guys present before. So we're going to look at consumer trends here. I want to take one moment to tell you a little bit about the difference between survey-based research and focus group research and transaction point-of-sale research. So survey-based research is awesome because it lets you really dig into these questions like, why is something happening? How do people feel? I have no idea how they feel. Even if I had the data, I'm a very data person. Feelings, not so good. Great with math, though. But so with this qualitative research, we can really understand how people feel. We get all this really interesting information. From quantitative research, what we get is a massive amount of data about what people do. So I see what you are doing in the store. I see your customer number, follow you over time, and I can track what you're doing. So they're very different things. The juxtaposition of them together is a really powerful bit of data, though. So as you're hearing all these things, try to call back to the things that you learned before and see how they mesh together, because that's really the most powerful data when you combine those two things together. So with that said, basket penetration of edible products. So what we're looking at here is what percent of transactions contained an edible, right? If edibles are growing, is it because there are just more baskets with them? And what we see is that's true. Edibles were about 15, 16% of baskets at the beginning of the year. Now they're creeping up well over 1 in 5 baskets in California has an edible in it at this point in time. Now though, does that mean that 1 in 5 people buy edibles? Or does it mean everybody buys edibles, but they buy it every 5th time they come into the store? This data would be true either way, right? But it's a very different strategy to how to deal with that if you're trying to increase your edible sales. If 1 in 5 people buy edibles, then what you need to do is get more customers to buy them, right? You need to have focus groups to understand what things make people not want to buy edibles. Why would you maybe want an edible? If people are only buying them every 1 in 5 times, they're being exposed to them, but for some reason they don't want them as often. So again, they're your focus groups. Focus more. Oh, a lot of focus, guys. Their focus groups would focus more on why aren't you buying them so often? What other things are you consuming? Are edibles maybe only part of your cannabis habit for certain things, right? And so maybe edibles are really only used for microdosing. That's how people think of them. Maybe we need to bring another product. So that's why it's important to look at these things and then couple it with that other type of research. Yeah?
And what region of California did you target on? Did you target both NorCal and SoCal, or?
This is everybody, yep. Yeah. Pretty even balance. We think, again, California is the murkiest market. So I use my best crystal ball.
Definitely different markets between both.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I used my very best crystal ball, and it told me we think that sales are a little bit higher in Southern California, like per capita even, than in Northern California. So it's slightly blended towards Southern. We do see a fairly different split. Edibles are a much bigger deal. Bigger deal is the wrong word. They're a big deal everywhere. Edibles are a bigger part of the market in Southern California. So as we're looking at this, we know that it's more baskets. We want to know, is it because 1 in 5 people buys edibles, or is it because everybody buys edibles every fifth time they come in? What we find is 36% of people in 2018 in California that bought cannabis products, not 36% of everybody, 36% of people who bought recreational cannabis products bought at least one edible that year. So we're getting a decent portion of the market, and not everybody, right? There's a lot of space to gain new consumers, but we really have more penetration than it looks like when we talk about basket sales or market share of edibles. So now what we want to know is, of these people that bought edibles, how often are they buying them? So what we find is, when a person bought an edible, as long as they came back to the store, 68% of them purchased another edible. So there's a decent repeat purchase rate there. It's not that people try an edible one time, they're like that lady in Colorado, they ate that chocolate bar years ago, and that horrifying story, she slept under her bed. She's a weird journalist. Anyway, so they're not having these like horrifying experiences with edibles and not coming back. A decent amount of people are coming back to purchase edibles. But here's the kicker. Of people that buy edibles, over half of them spend less than 25% of their cannabis wallet on edibles. So half of the people buying edibles spend a really big chunk of their money on other cannabis products. So what this tells me is edibles are something that pair up with other things. If you're an edibles consumer, you are really likely to be buying flower. But if you're a flower consumer, you may or may not be in edibles. So we have these places where we can start to understand our different types of consumers. Maybe that's a good place for behavioral profiles or use cases to help us understand what does that really mean. So now we know who's buying them. I'm just going to get a little bit into demographics. We do have demographic data at Headset, so as we're following these customers through, we have things like age and gender. We've started to build some behavioral shopper profiles, things like that, to help us dive a little deeper. So let's look at, we know that 36% of people buy edibles. Is that the same for everybody? And the answer is no. Women like edibles. So 44% of women bought an edible, but only about a third of men. And old people like edibles. So grandma's getting stoned. So what we see is in Gen Z, so it's the youngest generation, the oldest person in Gen Z is 22. And only by 4 months. It's a very young generation. We've just started to get data on them. But only about a third of them buy edibles. And it follows almost a perfect linear trend. In fact, if you take apart, I even broke apart young millennials and old millennials, but if you just put age on that bottom axis, it looks like a linear trend so much, I think I could submit it to a statistics textbook. I mean, it's really, it's so close, it's almost creepy. But what we see is you're just more likely to consume edibles the older and older you get. A lot of that is because, especially in California, we see a lot of one-to-one edibles that are mixed with like CBD, health and wellness. They're not really meant, so if you think about these age groups, right, old people, known for back pain. So when you mix these things with CBD, they're made for health and wellness. They are great for back pain. Millennials, Gen Z, not known for back pain, but they love to get stoned. So here, maybe the products aren't really marketed toward that quite as much. And so these are two of the ways that we see shopper behavior come out. Again, I can't know why they're consuming. That's totally what the qualitative research is for. But a lot of times this quantitative research can help you inform how you'll do that and what questions you'll ask. So those were my two stories. If you're like my niece, you always want more stories. So on our website headset.io, we have tons of free industry reports. I have been their data scientist since 2016, so I have written a ton. We have them going all the way back. Some of them are really fun. We publish them every month. We just published one yesterday on 420 in 2018. So it talks about 420 trends, what's going to happen, how to be ready. We did recently announce a strategic alliance with AC Nielsen, and so we used some AC Nielsen data in this to talk about what other things to compare it to. In this particular bit, I'm comparing it to alcohol sales. And so this is just another way to read more stories. If you need something to read while you go to sleep tonight, feel free to do that. And yeah, like I said, we have a bunch of products. We have retailer and bridge. Both of those are available in this market for you now. Yeah.
I have a question about, so when it's more about purchasing trends and purchasing of flour for smoking. So I think the National Academy came out with their study looking at beneficial and adverse effects of cannabis use. And I think it was a 2017 publication. And one of the things that they pointed out in this was that inhaling anything into your lungs is generally not good. So they talked about their myriad of health effects from inhaling stuff.
Sure.
And they also brought out a lot of the good ones too, based on their review of hundreds and hundreds of scientific studies.
Sure. Yeah.
So in the markets that had data prior to 2017 and after 2017, did you see any inflections?
We see a general trend away from flour. In fact, 2018 was the first year that we closed the year with flour being less than 50% of sales. So Washington, Colorado was legal since 2014. So in those 4 years, it was 77% of loose flour, 77% of sales in 2014. And so far this year, it's looking to come in around 42% and trending down every day. Yeah, we do see a fair amount of it coming into vapor pens. I am not a medical researcher by any means. I think the general consumer sentiment is that vapor pens might be healthier. I have no idea if that's true, but a general consumer sentiment is that belief. So we do see a little bit of that, not a little bit, we see a substantial portion of that flour and inhalable sales going into, for instance, vapor pens. It's especially true with the younger demographic. For the older demographic, when we start getting into older Gen Xers, baby boomers, here we start to see a really big growth has happened this year in tinctures, topicals, anything with CBD. I mean, if you put CBD in anything that sits still, they'll take it. And so we see it even in our cannabis dispensaries. These are usually marijuana-derived CBD. It's not the hemp stuff that you see in the grocery stores or whatever. At the pet store, man, people are getting their dogs high. If I take my pet store as an example, so much CBD. It's people that are 76 and older. Yeah, they're real quiet, that's why you don't know about them. Yeah. They're the older generation. That's when we write out the reports. They're usually grandma's getting stoned. But yeah, so those generations definitely we start to see a lot of CBD. CBD's been really interesting. That's another one that we'll release soon. Is another bedtime story for you on CBD, especially cannabis-derived CBD. So what we see are if a product says CBD in its name, or if it's a one-to-one product or a CBD-only product, those are selling for sometimes 70% more than their THC counterparts. I mean, the markups on these are insane compared to THC. And a lot of it is coming into these health and wellness products, and almost all of that is driven by boomers and the silent generation entering the market. Their growth has been substantial. So millennials actually were more than 50% of the market for a long time. They lost that percentage, and it wasn't to Gen Z, who's aging into the market. It's to boomers and the silent generation who, to say it nicely, are aging out of the market. You don't usually see those groups of people increase their spend, because when you map it with actuarial tables, life expectancy, their spend generally goes down over time. But since these are health and wellness, same as their spending on pharma goes up, their spending in cannabis is coming up. And it's a really great opportunity. I saw this one, then that one. Y'all want to work it out? All right.
Since you're talking about CBD, it's in grocery stores and pharmacies. How are you trending that?
Yeah, so our CBD sales, the ones that I'm talking about, are just CBD sales that are happening in recreational cannabis dispensaries. So it is, sometimes it's a CBD only product. There are totally CBD only gummies and things like that. A lot of times it's one-to-one products that I'm talking about.
But you're not getting the pharmacy.
I'm not, though we are, like I said, we do have that strategic alliance with Nielsen, who is very much working on getting that. I think our goal is to work with them on that. I just don't have any timelines yet. They're a big company, and you wouldn't believe how slow big companies are.
Right.
Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about growth, and I
what do you forecast in a year those growth rates to be?
Right.
Stable or increasing?
Yeah.
At the same rate of growth?
Yeah, totally. So we saw both Colorado and Washington kind of move to this point of what I would call like a stabilized growth. So we're not in those explosive segments anymore. I think Washington last year was maybe 6% year, for the whole year. On average, month-over-month growth was 6%. I think Colorado was just a touch higher. California still has some pretty healthy growth rates. Though there's a whole lot that's going to come into the market soon with all the temporary licenses expiring. I pity the fool whose job it is to forecast the California market. It's myself, but I really pity me. I've used all my best crystal balls. I'm not sure what's going to happen there. I want to tell you, but I don't have any level of confidence in it. But I do think what we'll see in Washington and Colorado is pretty stable growth, but I think we'll see really big gains, again, still in these CBDs and some of these other segments. We're starting to see some like really interesting edibles come into the market. Multi-pack pre-rolls are doing very well. So I think there are definitely segments where we will see the big growth numbers we used to see. But I think top line growth maybe is getting to a more stable place.
And after Oregon, what's your next state that you're going to hope to gain collective mass data?
Oh my gosh, any ideas there, Manny?
Yeah, so Oregon, it's looking pretty good, so that should be up. Definitely, it's a target for us in Q2, so over the next couple of months. Arizona is seeing some good traction. Florida, we are on the verge of having the full insights product in Canada as well. Not that you care, or maybe you do. But yeah, I mean, this is moving fast, and we are very excited about the safe the legislation that got the next step, and more traction and more markets coming in. So this potentially is going to be, over the next year for us. The next time that we speak, if we speak in a year, it's going to be completely different. So yeah, but top of mind, I think Oregon, pretty decent chance it's going to be in the next few weeks, couple of months. Arizona as well, and then the sky is the limit.
I think too, even in the states where things are stable, it's kind of like that trend I talked about with the basket size, where it looks relatively calm on top and you go underneath and it is wild. And so I think that's one of the reasons it's so important to stay on top of your data and really understand what's happening, is sometimes we get kind of comfy in those top line trends and we miss the like slightly quieter things that are happening. And it's just a way that you can miss out on really good opportunities by knowing the data. All my questions? Well, please use your own data, use my data, hell, use someone else's data. Please use data when you make your decisions. The next time you see, hell yeah, everybody's data.
Remember, go to our website. The information that we publish every month, it's a deep dive report. It's easy read. It's anywhere from 10 to 15 pages. You will really appreciate it. The March one was about pricing trends. We released a couple of days ago the 420 trends based on 4 years of data, plus some predictions of what's going to happen. But on top of those reports that we release every month, we have blogs that we constantly put out every week. For example, in March, we have like 3 that were really interesting. We dive into female, for example, consumer trends and what female liked and want and what we were seeing. It was a blog post, really nice reading, also free on our website. We dive into, for example, for retailers, we are always, or you guys are always in pursuit of that inventory sweet spot, right? So we dove into that and wrote a nice story about it. Also, some pointers about how to train your bot tenders. You saw it in the data from our friends at DHM, and we see the same thing. Like bot tender is going to be the gateway to a successful experience in transactions. So we also dove into that and write about it. So we always put some really good content out. Visit us, check it out constantly. There's good information out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope y'all have a good night.